Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. I'm calling to order this special meeting of the Charter Revision Commission. Our purpose this evening, after doing some routine business, is to discuss in more detail sections 8.10 and 8.11 having to do with city purchasing procedures and emergency purchasing procedures. So with that, I will ask for roll call.
Brown,
Here.
Cochran,
Here.
Hoganson,
Here.
Nobschneider, Nobschneider,
Whoops, sorry.
I'm sorry, Nobschneider, Metz, Neal, Paholka, Weaver,
Okay, item 3, approval of the agenda. I have no additions or corrections, so
Do you want to do the two resolutions now for the,
yes, please.
okay.
We have 2 members who are absent, and we need to do resolutions to excuse them. First is to exclude Commissioner Amy Metz due to inclement weather. She is stuck elsewhere and is unable to get back to Big Rapids.
Motion to accept her excuse.
Second.
Ready to roll call? Or just-
Yeah,
Brown,
Yes.
Cochran,
yes.
Hoganson,
Yes.
Nobschneider,
Yes.
Paholka,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That resolution is approved. Our next resolution is to excuse Commissioner Foster Neal due to illness. May I have a motion?
Motion to approve Foster Neal's.
Second.
Hoganson,
Yes.
Nobschneider, Paholka,
Yes.
Weaver, Brown,
Yes.
Cochran.
Yes. Okay. Next item is to approve the minutes of January 8th. Do I hear any additions, deletions, corrections? Hearing none, and I just have a voice vote. All in favor of approving the minutes of January 8th, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, now down to business. We had, as you know, quite a lengthy meeting last time with our Director of Public Works, Heather Bowman, who has graciously agreed to sit through it again with us. And we will be, I think, expecting later on the city manager, Chief Schroeder, Fire Department,
Yep,
and Chief Haynes,
hopefully she'll be here. She's just got back yesterday.
City
And-
Treasurer.
Yes.
So they will be joining us around 6:30. We're holding a special meeting because we determined at the last meeting that there really was more to unpack here than we had anticipated. So we wanted some extra time to just focus on this issue so that we could kind of parse out what it is we're looking to try and change and what would be the best way to do that. I think it's fair to say that what we're trying to accomplish here is to kind of streamline this process. We're looking at a couple of different things. Whether or not to stipulate a dollar amount as the cap above which the process has to proceed, or to figure that a different way. And then the other question involved is the process of where it goes to and what is the role of the city manager in that and what is the role of the city commission in that. As Mrs. Bowman pointed out to us at our last meeting, a difficulty with the process as it exists now is the delay time when you have to go out for bids and then you have to take it to the city commission and what that means for them in terms of their capacity to do timely purchase of things that the departments indicate that they need. So, I'm going to kind of leave this open to discussion. Karen has graciously provided for us the ordinance, which handles all of the purchasing and from various denominations under 2,000 to 5,000 5 to 7,500 and over 7,500. And as I indicated in my email to everyone, going back through the old documents from the previous commission, I did discover that they were the ones who raised it to 7,500 from a previous value of 5,000. The previous, when they did their charter review, the charter had not been reviewed in 20 years. So I'm assuming that that 5,000 figure was there for quite a while. However, we know what the issues are about the 7,500 at this point. You should have had time to take a look at the notes from Commissioner Neal. And I also sent you some wording from the Traverse City Charter, which is a different way to think about that dollar amount, not as a stipulated dollar amount, but as a percentage of the budgeted operational expenses. What I would like to do, I would like for our goal this evening, we don't need to really be deciding anything particularly, but to really flesh out this discussion, get some ideas down for how we might craft this, that we can then present to Mrs. Bowman's going to be here in our conversation, but the other department heads, so that we could get a good bead on the wording that we could propose to include in the charter. So with that, I'm going to kind of leave the floor open.
Got a question right off the bat. Which has precedence, the charter or the code of ordinances?
It's
I
the
believe it
charter.
is the charter, yes. The ordinance comes from the charter.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
So if we change the charter, the code of ordinance is gonna have to be changed to match it.
Right.
Yes.
How does that get done? Is that an amendment by the board or by the city commission or?
Yes. Yeah.
The new ordinance would go before the commission.
I like what Foster said, what his writing was, his thing was. The only thing I would add in there is that city treasurer somehow in that, so that they know where the money's coming from, what money is available.
Give me a for instance, where would you put it? Now, is everyone on the same, you got your,
It's this page here,
yeah, it says notes from Foster Neal on the top.
somewhere like in section C, where it asks for proof of sufficient budget sponge. Just add in that the city treasurer would give the, so that the money people are in there, 811C there, to obtain a formal request, and just add city treasurer in there somewhere, somehow.
Okay.
That one's only under emergency purchasing, not the regular
Yeah.
purchasing.
So obtain a formal request from the appropriate department head.
And city treasurer? City treasurer won't know the, but won't have to cite in the need.
Okay, well, it says proof of sufficient budget funds.
That's, I would like to somehow make that come from the city treasurer.
Would you like affirmation of sufficient budget funds from the city treasurer?
Yeah,
Is that what you're going at?
So the flow goes, department head states need, communicates need to city.
That way we got the department head, the city manager, and the treasurer all on the same page saying that this is legit.
Right, so what I'm saying
So
is,
we've got some check and balance there.
so the structure could go, request from the department head to the city manager then confirms with the treasurer, and that's sort of the checklist, right?
Yeah.
I'd add just a little bit more, I am very much on the same page as Foster. And I think he may kind of have done what I did, which is go look up other cities and how their charters work around basically. I looked at Muskegon and Grand Rapids, and I was kind of stunned because like the city of Muskegon, I think their cap is something like $500, and I'm thinking, how do they function like that? They do something very similar to what Grand Rapids does, where in cases of emergency expenditure within a certain range, the city manager is empowered. And I don't think we need necessarily as emergency expenditure, it's just like, it's unplanned, right, not part of CIP. And I like that because it kind of creates some of the flexibility that we're looking for. And I think Foster's suggestion here are good, but maybe a little too open-ended. My recommendation would be that we consider still having some incremental handbrakes. So Grand Rapids approves their city manager, I think, up to 500,000, and then anything above that absolutely must go before the city commission. Obviously, their operating costs and the value of things that they're obtaining is significantly higher than what we're likely to encounter here. But maybe we could follow that model. I think they do 10,000 to 100,000. So anything they do like a pre-approval process or approval appropriation in advance for certain things that they anticipate may happen. I think that's something we should still look at. Is there a way to still give the city commission some authority over cost effectiveness? And within that, Grand Rapids, I think 10,000 to 100,000, they can leave. Basically, the city manager can be the person who gives that approval. And that's something I would support, something that gives significantly greater flexibility and ability to act immediate if we need to procure the tools that city staff need to do their job, but also to still give the city commission broader oversight into
Okay, the idea of pre-approval process for anticipated needs, tell me how that intersects with the CIP process. My understanding of the CIP process, of course, is that the departments determine what projects they're going to be working on over the course of the, actually 6 year. CIP goes over 6 years. And what they do is they prioritize what their needs are for those projects, most immediate, farther on down the line. Projects that can afford to spread that budgeting over 2 or 3 years. So I don't know if that's, when you're considering, and I'm just talking out loud here, so forgive me. Because this thing is like a hydra with many heads coming off the same body. When departments are going through the CIP process, is it possible for them to anticipate equipment? We're talking about projects, but with projects you're going to have equipment. Or I think, for example, we can check this with Chief Schroeder when he comes, but when the fire department does their CIP, I remember this from past practice, when they know they're going to have to buy a fire truck, they let the city commission know 3 years in advance, and we worked with that to put the money aside to make sure that it was there. So I don't know if there's something similar to that.
Yeah,
that you're talking about.
like provisional, right? It's possible that X thing will fail and we'll need to replace it.
Yeah.
Can we be approved up to a certain amount and then to simply act on that? That way you take basically you put the time of consideration and everything else on the part of the city commission at the front end, before you actually need it. You've got pre-authorization and to do it if you do end up needing to within whatever 3 years, and then you would agree that you're able to do that at that time.
The CIP, correct me if I'm wrong, the CIP process pretty much, it gets budgeted so that you kind of know that money is there, right?
Yes.
So, and I think, what we're talking about in terms of moving some of this more onto the city manager is to reduce those instances where you have to take the time to go to the city commission because they only meet twice a month. So that, anytime when the city manager can make that decision, it speeds up the process for the department heads to make the purchase. Am I right? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I think I'd speak to the CIP process. Historically, we've followed the charter in terms of what would categorize a capital improvement project, meaning if it costs at least $10,000 or more, we know that that's something that needs to be taken into consideration when moving forward with the budget process. So with that being said, all the CIPs that you will see be presented to the commission and the planning and park board, all of the other entities, primarily will be more than $10,000, just so that we can budget accordingly. And so with that being said, this particular portion of the charter, the reason for the request for the increase is primarily what you guys are talking about, is those change orders and maintenance things that have to occur, and we are experiencing delays premised off of that dollar amount that's listed there. So there could be an opportunity to potentially notate within the charter that when planning for the budget, CIP would be categorized as $10,000 or $15,000 and more, and then a purchase wouldn't have to necessarily go through the bid process or the RFQ or the RFP process to get approved by the commission, so that we can still function as needed without those delays by approval from the commission. There's a lot of different opportunities to make some investments.
That's kind of what I'm asking, is maybe not necessarily like emergency authorization, but short-term need or something like that.
Sure.
City manager has the authority and has to report after the fact to the city commission within a certain amount. And perhaps even, there's some way to implement in there that the city commission knows or is apprised at the start of planning that, these 10 things are things that department heads think are feasible, that could be coming in the next, whatever the term of planning is, 3 years, and they can offer whatever kind of prior approval. That way it's not like, and my concern is, right, having this be something that everybody can understand, and not having people go, well, they seem to be doing a lot of emergency spending, but rather they seem to be utilizing this tool that gives greater flexibility while still having the commission ultimately have
At the very bottom of the page for Foster's notes and on the back, at the start of each fiscal year, the city treasurer, with the approval of the city manager, may advise the commission to set a temporary maximum exceeding, whatever that is, 12.5 in July 2024 dollars adjusted for inflation, that can last no longer than one fiscal year. How do you feel about that one?
I don't understand, I'm not 100% sure what that would accomplish. Why 1 year? Is that to allow for, emergency increases in cost?
I'm assuming that it is within, I'm not sure where he got the language for this, but the budget for that year, fitting into this is why I was interested in what Traverse City proposed and what they do, which is not even to set the amount, but to indicate an amount equivalent to 1/10 of 1% of the budgeted operational expenses of the general fund in a given fiscal year. It's kind of a similar idea to I think what Foster's proposing, you have, somebody has the leeway, you know, if city commission has the leeway to raise that cap within that fiscal year, if necessary.
I think the issue with doing that is you're still gonna have certain departments that doesn't cover enough. And then other departments, it's gonna be more than they would ever really need. So I don't know that that's really resolving the dollar amount issue. I think involving the city manager to a certain point, rather than always relying on the commission, is a good thing. But that only fixes half of the issue that we're having. My thoughts, the more I think about this whole thing, the more I'm of the mind that we should do something along the lines of the treasurer, city manager, or designee, whoever it is, recommends a dollar limit for purchases requiring bids on whatever basis they need, whenever they need to make that recommendation, if it's annual or as needed. And that goes to the commission for approval. The purchasing documents, the rules and regulations for the city are done at that point. They create an ordinance, and it just works that way. And they can have, as part of the ordinance and the procedures, different things. And they can say, okay, well, for projects, we want to do this. For infrastructure, we want to do this. But that might change over time, and what works today isn't necessarily going to work 15 years from now. So it gives them the leeway to say, okay, the treasurer has input, the manager has to okay it, then the commission has to okay it, and then we can work from that. But then the city can work together to figure out what's going to work best for them. And then it's taking the dollar amount out, it's putting people in potentially, assuming that the city and the city commissioners agree to something, and they'll say, okay, well, we think it doesn't need to come to the commission until it reaches this point, and then they can say the treasurer approves, the department head approves, the manager approves, whoever it is, based on whatever the needs are for the city at that time. And then it's not in our hands to try to figure out the whole thing, because none of us are city employees, we don't really understand the process. So for us to be the ones making the suggestions, the recommendations, doesn't really seem like it's gonna serve anyone well. Regardless of what we do, it's not gonna be good enough.
Well, I guess, you know, my concern, and you're gonna have to put that in writing for me so I understand what you just said.
Yeah.
But I got the gist of it. And I guess, you know, what I'm struggling with is this dancing around what the magic number should be. Because, let's figure, you know, let's just look at from 2012 when the last charter was approved, 7,500 maybe was working back then. In that space of a decade, where we are, where, I mean, we're not even talking 12.5, we're talking about the need for 30,000 or possibly 50,000. As we've seen, if you took a look at some data that, I guess this actually came from Mark Gifford. And I guess I'm of this mind where I feel like we're kind of doing a fool's errand to try and put a number on it when we know that things are more dynamic than they used to be. There are other influences now that are going to be affecting costs, the rate of inflation, tariffs, whatever that happens to be. And you can't keep coming back to change the charter every time that happens. And even the process of going through a charter amendment is still time consuming, and it still has to go to the voters, so you have to wait to get it on the ballot and so on and so forth. I mean, even this, as we're talking about it, you know, this is not gonna go into effect until the charter gets approved, hopefully in 2026. So I like that idea. I like the idea of figuring out a process that makes sense, that doesn't give carte blanche to any individual. You wanna have checks, you wanna have safeguards for sure, up and down the system. And we also wanna have the flexibility to be able to be nimble and purchase when we need to make purchases, and reduce the number of emergency purchases by virtue of putting that system around the whole purchasing process to begin with. So, where does that leave us?
I think
What did I just say? Somebody send it back to me.
my only concern with that is to what extent, and you're probably right, that in many instances we're handing the question of what the magic number is off to people who are in a better position to determine that and define it. However, it's still handing off the same conundrum that we have here to other city employees, potentially, stalling or otherwise inhibiting their work as well. If we, let's say we were to kick it to the commission at the start of every year, or every CIP process, to set that cap for themselves, or empowered somebody else, treasurer, purchasing agent, city manager, to set that cap for themselves. We have been very, very fortunate to have really, really good and effective management. We may not always have that luxury. And so to what extent are we also something that is so integral to the city's function into hands that are unknown? That's where I get concerned, right? There's no cap on anything, city manager says it, and it's good. That could also open the door for somebody, somebody, but potentially somebody irresponsible who enters that role in the future to create considerable problems for the city. So I do think it needs a range. But we empower somebody like the commission to work within that range, or to set a specific cap that falls within it for I'd be comfortable.
Well, my proposal is that the treasurer or city manager or designee, whoever it is, makes the recommendation, but it needs commissioner approval. And at that point, you're going to people who were voted in by city residents. And if the commission is approving a bad request from whoever the city representative is for that, we voted those people in. Like, they're supposed to be working for us. And at that point, like, if we're completely out of control, we're completely out of control, and there's really nothing that can be done. We could handhold and put limits on it, but if everything else in the charter is mostly working like it is now, with purchasing potentially being one of the biggest issues, it might be another 20 years before they revisit this, and then whatever that limit is might just be completely unreasonable. Thinking back, 15, 20 years ago, dollar amounts for things that we see today would seem completely unreasonable, and, that's never going to happen. And so, without knowing the frequency of the charter being revised and things like that, things that seem completely crazy might be our reality.
That's a scary thought.
I'm good at
Prepared
breaking
for
down the
crazy.
room.
This feels like the week for scary thoughts, though, does it not?
Okay, let's talk about what do we see as the role of the city manager? That we're kind of, it seems to me like we're moving toward investing him with a little more responsibility, right? Before it has to go to the city commission for.
I don't know, more responsibility. He's got the responsibility to make the city run the way it is, so, he's already has that responsibility.
Yes, he does.
It seems to me we should be involving both the city treasurer and the city manager in this, though. Having them maybe have an annual report to the commission to approve an amount. Is that enough checks, having the two of them work together? together, or is there a third that would fit in there to make sure that we're safeguarding the city as well?
I mean, then again, we're kind of recreating the same structure that's problematic right now, having to convene a group of people. Get something agreed. But I think the
But if
purchasing
they're
agent
doing an
would be the.
annual budget report together, could it be?
If they're doing it annually, yes, but the challenge that we're talking about is an emergent need where they've got to consult, go back and consult.
To have it be part of the
Yeah.
budget report? Just an upper limit per
Yeah,
year?
just on that figure.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like, right now, anything above 7,500 goes to city commission approval. And what we're trying to get at is to put the city manager in there in between for some amount of a project that he or she will have authority to approve before, without having to go to the city commission. And I think what you're suggesting is putting a cap on that, as Grand Rapids does, right? Which I think makes good sense, otherwise you're kind of handing the CM much.
Well, you're kind of handing them a nightmare too, because
Yes.
they're gonna get hit up for a lot
Yes.
of stuff that, just based on the fact that they've got that.
Because, the bottom line is, of course, one of the major responsibilities of the city commission is to be responsible stewards of the city's money, that's taxpayer money.
They're elected, so part of anything that oversight that we take from them is really taking some of that power away from the people and electing them as representatives.
So are we talking about giving the city manager a little more leeway to do X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, and C? Where are the boundaries that we're talking about with the city manager?
My opinion is to not have anything in the charter as far as that process. And perhaps in the future, it's not the city manager that would be the one approving it, and it would go to the treasurer or a purchasing department or something else. So dictating a specific role, while it's the logical choice now, it may or may not be in the future, depending on how things change. But I feel like we as a group would be able to, assuming the whole charter goes through, make a recommendation to the city commission for the initial outlay, saying we would like to see something in which the city manager takes more responsibility for a lot of the everyday purchases at whatever dollar amount that is before it goes to the city commission, just to help with that. And we can make a recommendation based on that. Maybe it's $20,000 or something like that, but it's ultimately up to them in the city to work out what the best case scenario is. Because they might end up making a decision that, certain departments or projects versus regular purchases will be treated differently. And I don't want anything that we request, because we don't see the big picture, to hinder them with doing that. And I know it's throwing a lot on the city and the city commission and the city manager, but ultimately I think they're the ones that we're gonna hurt by making a decision that is too strict. And is it really fairly open-ended for what I'm doing? Yes. Is that potentially a problem? Yes, but hopefully the city wouldn't take advantage of that, and the city commissioners wouldn't take advantage of that.
In your vision for this, and I mean to put you on the spot. What would the language in the charter be?
So something that I just wrote up quickly after our last meeting was the treasurer/city manager or designee recommends dollar limit for purchases requiring competitive bids and requiring commissioner approval. The commission approves or denies creating ordinance if approved. Purchasing process is amended as needed.
You have that as section 810, is that where you'd put that?
Yeah.
And get rid of the rest of it in 810, or? Work, and then we could change 8.2, the budget procedure, to have where they select where they present to the city commission the purchasing limit.
You guys
So
want me to
many-
type up what I have so you can actually read
Yes,
it?
That would
can
be
eyeball
yes.
it.
You guys can just tell me to get to do my
Yeah.
job.
Why
You
don't
don't
you
have to
not?
wait for me to offer.
Okay. Couple questions. Requiring competitive bids needs a criterion. What constitutes something that requires a competitive bid?
Well, right now it's $7,500.
Right.
So the treasurer or city manager designates what dollar limit would require that.
And what is the trigger for that? Is that July 1? Is it a new fiscal year? You say the treasurer/city manager recommends a dollar limit.
In the 8.2, it's by the second Monday in November or in
Okay.
February, each officer must get their budget in. So we could attach it to that.
What you're saying so each fiscal year,
Potentially.
Uh,
My thought initially was as needed. It might happen multiple times a year depending on what is happening in that year.
I guess my question about that is, having to, every time they do that, they have to create a new ordinance, which would then only be good for that year.
Or shorter.
Shorter, I guess, depending on the length of time, you'd
Why
have to.
would the ordinance
Stipulate
only
a-
be good for a year?
Because a new ordinance needs to be created based on the limit. Purchasing ordinance contains.
And the thing that I think we're grappling with is, if we're gonna assume that costs are gonna continue to rise year over year,
Yeah.
it's highly likely, then we're talking about, and if we're, every time that happens, you have to go through this process again. Am I understanding you?
Yes, my assumption with this is that the city is not going to move forward with doing this, to go from 5,000 to 7,500 to 12,500. They're gonna take, the 7,500 that it is now and be like, we're going for 30,000. And then it should potentially be several years, maybe the first couple of years, it'll take some revision and be like, okay, 30,000 didn't quite work for us, let's go up to 50. But at some point, they should be able to find a sweet spot that they can stick at for several years. So they don't necessarily have to update it often. And they can plan ahead and be like, okay, well, we know these sorts of things are happening, so for next year, we want to plan, we're gonna have to start thinking about, we're hitting this limit too often, too many things are starting to come to the commission now, and then they can make the adjustments there. I don't think that they need to be nickeling and diming every single year for this. I would like to think that they would take an approach where they're looking 5 years in the future, what do we think is gonna cover us, and then once that no longer works, then they can revisit it.
This would be completely ad hoc. As it becomes necessary, the city manager and treasurer convene. They're noting that they're having to, to bring more things to the city commission than they feel allows them to operate nimbly. They just do it as needed, make a new recommendation. If approved, the ordinance gets changed.
My other question is, and we'll have to ask this of Carla when she comes, how does this jive with the budgeting process?
Yeah. That's
don't
kind
know
of
the
what
answer
I'm
to that.
wondering.
That's why I'm
because
asking it.
If you are changing, if your modification of this isn't tied to any time frame or anything practical related to the budget, then you've got sort of one set of purse strings, but perhaps a purse that no longer fits them.
Fits the strings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you suggesting, Stacy, that that just takes the place of all of 8.10?
Yes.
So then, just for clarification, if that were to be the case, would the recommendation be to have a budgetary number that is basically selected and agreed upon between the city manager and the treasurer, and then as it changes, the ordinance changes along with it in terms of the purchasing policy?
Yep.
Based on whatever the city manager and the treasurer are comfortable with?
Yep. So if the treasurer and city manager go to the commission and say, what we have now isn't working for us, we're struggling, we need to make a change, they put forth their proposed changes. It could be dollar amount, it could be a process-based change. It doesn't necessarily have to be a particular thing. The commission would approve it, and as part of that request, they could already have, this is our proposed process change, and here's everything that we're proposing. And then they can potentially approve it all in one go, and it's ready to go.
The challenge I see on staff's end with that recommendation is that historically, not just with our municipality, but all municipalities for that matter, as you can see from the document from other is that in terms of planning for capital improvement projects, kind of puts us in a limbo, like we don't know what direction we're heading. So like, for example, when we start considering capital improvement projects, specifically like streets or infrastructure or things of that matter, they're identified over the course of a construction year. And then you plan accordingly in terms of rating with PACER rating and all these other functions, which are done probably about 6 months prior to things being put on paper. So then it's kind of putting staff in this weird kind of spot where one year it could be $25,000 is what we're targeting for a CIP. But then there's the potential of another year, well, we think it might be up to 40, but then it doesn't get approved as 40. We're behind the queue. Now you've got a project that's 30. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where it gets a little challenging.
Right, and I feel like this kind of opens it up where the purchasing process can be expanded and be like, for regular purchases, it's this. For CIP stuff, it's this. and like have a distinct process for different scenarios. Or if there's like a replacement schedule for gear, equipment, whatever, warranties ending and making sure everything's covered, there could be specific procedures or policies in place that cover those unique things, and those could potentially have a different dollar amount. But that's
So that would
not
be
being hindered
changing
by like one big
The
process.
ordinance then.
It'd be the ordinance or the purchasing process that would
It
allow
wouldn't
that.
be in the charter.
Right, it wouldn't be in the charter, the rules saying it has to be the treasurer, city manager, commission approval, and then what works for the city that gets approved is what works. And it gives a lot of options for the city to say, okay, this works 80% of the time, these random occurrences or these like big occurrences that we know are going to happen eventually, we need some kind of exclusion for that. And that can be worked out. It would be a lot of work for the city to initially come up with what the purchasing process is going to be that works, but ultimately in the long run, you know, within a couple of years, that should be pretty well figured out. And then it's less work to maintain that, keep up with it. And it'll be time saving because you're not going through this whole process. Dollar amounts aren't going out of date. As things change, you can just amend things.
Wait, did you put that as like a minimum of two? The way it's worded, it can be just one person. So if you have two, you know, like a city manager, treasurer, or city manager and a designee working together, so you're not, one person isn't in control of the whole thing, I'm just asking.
Treasurer and city treasurer and city manager.
Or, you know, I know what you're saying as a designee, but just to have two people.
Do we want to open that up for designation?
Yeah.
That to me seems like
I'd
something
get rid of the
we
designee.
specifically would want the treasurer and city
And the city
manager,
manager, yeah.
not designees in.
We have specifically added their designee to so many parts of the charter.
But they're minor things.
Yeah,
Okay, but then the city manager's out on medical leave and they have an acting city manager, but because we didn't allow for designees, they can't do things.
Good point.
That's the same reason we added it for everything else. I wouldn't think that they're normally going to,
that would
that
be
off
my
of
thought. Is
someone
this isn't a thing that's happening every month or maybe even every year?
ultimately it shouldn't be changed all that frequently as long as, you know, I mean, if the city commission is just at the point where they're like, no, we don't wanna spend any money whatsoever, so we're gonna tie everyone's hands, then it's gonna be, okay, well, let's change this and tweak it to try to get it to be approved, to get things, that's ultimately not how it should work.
If it's a process that's kind of intended to be not definitive per se, but that is once a year, once every couple of years type of process. I guess I'm wondering if, and it's a process everybody knows is coming and can be prepared for. It's not like, oh my gosh, we forgot this is happening next week and Mark's out, so we need somebody else to submit this recommendation. I really think we need the city manager, if you wanted to allow for an acting manager or something like that, but I really think the treasurer and city manager should be.
I'm inclined to agree on this one. Ordinarily, when we put the designees in, it's for attending meetings. You know, if the city manager can't be at the meeting, he can designate someone to, you know, attend in his place, but for this is much more serious.
The purpose of that specifically, from my perspective, is it avoids responsibility and who's responsible for if it can be avoided and the buck can be passed to a designee who is somebody who can later be held up as being accountable instead of the person who it really should be. That's it. So I think in this instance, we do need ownership with the actual. Especially given that they're getting the flexibility to wind and unwind it, then I think it really needs to live with.
Oh, okay.
And I know this is taking a very different stance than what we currently have and what Foster proposed, which I think our group is in agreement that we like the structure and, keeping things limited so they can't get out of control. And this kind of takes a lot of that away. The question is, are we comfortable with that, or do we go back to something more like what Foster proposed? Before we, start really asking for input one way or the other from.
I'm not prepared to make a directional decision like that at this time. I'm gonna be thinking about this for weeks, so.
I need to hear from the other department heads too. Hello?
I just took mine and
Just,
coughed up a kidney in the office.
well, let me introduce you, if you don't know them already, to the individuals who have now joined us. At the far end of the table there, Mrs. Bowman is City Manager Mark Gifford, and next to him is Fire Chief Steve Schroeder, and next to him is Police Chief Danny Haynes. And thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We had no idea this was going to turn out to be so intriguing, this conversation. So just for you folks, just to recap what we've been, grappling with here. At our last meeting, Heather came and talked to us about sections 8.10 and 8.11 about purchasing and emergency purchasing. And in the course of that conversation, basically three basic themes emerged. One is revolving around this dollar amount. How do we set that, or do we set that, or put some alternative situation in? The second one is the process that you have to go through once it gets past that cap. And the ramifications of that on your ability to make timely purchases of various and sundry things. And the third is we're kind of dancing around the role of the city manager with all of this stuff, and whether or not to, some of the suggestions that we've heard, kind of move stuff off of the city commission and onto the city manager before it gets to the city commission. So bottom line, we're trying to see if we can figure out a system that is more flexible, to allow you to be more nimble, that still retains the integrity of the process, and the fiscal stewardship that the city commission needs to maintain. City Treasurer Carla Staffen now joins us. I think we're at full house now. So, I don't know if you folks had an opportunity to look at some of the materials that were sent out for us. One thing is, we have one of our commissioners who's unfortunately not able to be here due to illness, but Foster Neal sent forth some suggestions for what he might do, and Stacy has been offering us a different kind of way to conceive of this. They have to let you do this again, Stace, because I don't want to trust my own capacity to recap what you just did. But she's offering us a different way to think about it. I don't know, because I don't deal with these issues on a daily basis, but you folks do. Need your input as to whether that's workable, how it could be made to work, or whatever. So if you've already had a chance to look at the materials, I don't know if you have, or do you want to take a few minutes? Otherwise, I would ask Stacy to kind of recap what she's suggesting as an alternative.
So, when when we've been thinking about this, it's do we modify what we currently have, increase dollar amounts, maybe add roles, make some changes there. The more I thought about it, the more I thought the charter shouldn't be as limiting for the process. So my recommendations up here right now, the treasurer and city manager recommend a dollar limit for purchases requiring competitive bids, which requires commissioner approval. If the commission approves, they would create ordinance for that, and then the purchasing process would be amended as needed. So the thought process for this is that putting a specific dollar amount on something doesn't really work. It might work for one department, but not another, based on the individual needs. This would give the option to adjust dollar amounts for normal purchases for the majority of things, and, you know, set it ahead knowing what we expect in 5 years or so. It doesn't always have to be updated. It could be updated annually depending on what works best for the city. So we're not limiting them on that. And then if there's, you know, regular purchases, there's CIP processes that might be handled completely differently. And that could be dictated in the ordinance, and there could be different purchasing processes for those things. Same thing, infrastructure versus, you know, general maintenance could be handled differently. If a new fire truck is needed or repairs to a fire truck, there could be exceptions and be like, you know, for emergency vehicles, here's our limit before you have to start going through these processes. And it could be as nuanced or as broad as what works for the city and the commission. It puts a lot of work on the city and the commission to come up with a process that's gonna work for all the things. And it would require a lot of tweaking, at least for the first couple of years, but I feel like once that was all put in place, just keeping it up to date and making sure it changes as our world changes, it would probably be beneficial in the long run.
I'll jump in. Yeah, so,
Go for it.
so, yeah, well, the interesting part about that, and the commission at the end of their meeting, I'm assuming some of them must be watching you folks on, which is great, and good work and all the time and effort you're putting into this, asked me to put together a resolution for their next meeting, which is February 3rd, in which they would pass a resolution recommending to the Charter Commission, or asking, I don't know about recommending, more asking, or for you to consider sort of this, having it not a part, any sort of dollar amount limit or maybe any limit at all in the charter, in that they would adopt an ordinance that would be more flexible, easily changed, those types of things, so you're not wrestling with inflation. I was just reading Foster's thing here. It could be done, it just, you know, seems cumbersome, kind of. So, and
He's saying right there.
yeah, that's essentially what the city commission, after their next meeting, I'll be delivering to you folks. So, however you process that, I think makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't think that any of us have a massive issue with however you did it. I mean, 7,500 is low. It's, you know, the world we're in, that's not a lot of money on a city scale. I mean, there's nothing you buy for a fire department that's under $7,500. There's just, I mean, there's just hardly anything there. I mean, so, you know, we bump into it, most of the things you end up bidding, right? And we bump into it as much as anything with Public Works, and I think Heather did a really good job of talking about that last time, but yeah, having it outside the charter and in a city ordinance, which an ordinance has a 4/5 vote requirement, so you know, the supermajority would be some level of protection that it's not changed easily or on a whim or any of those types of things. That appeals to me. I don't.
We made it so that you had, the city treasurer and you had to make a recommendation every year to the commission via the budget procedure, like you normally do in the CIP, and just you make your recommendation, or if no changes, you say no changes, come up with a number your first year and.
Carla, we could easily do
I
that.
would be in favor
Yeah,
of
we
that.
could easily do that. That wouldn't be cumbersome to us, at all, I don't think.
Solve.
I think it would. You know, it's interesting, is I watched your meetings too, like last meeting, and Heather, reciting all the different things. Sometimes I use it to my advantage, and I told her that, it's like, well, you gotta bid it out, and sometimes that works, but it really what she's talking about is efficiency. That's essentially what you're talking about.
Correct.
Is how much do we wanna delay, wait, bid, time? If efficiency matters to you, then this should matter. And it matters to Heather as, water mains are broken and sewer mains are broken and things at the wastewater plant. I mean, that's just stuff that cannot be down for any amount of time. So, and we have provisions for that with emergency purchases. It's tedious, right? And, I think you guys are doing good analysis on this. The ordinance thing is Carla and I, or whomever's in our roles, recommending a limit for that year, adjusting it over time. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, to me, it does. Yeah.
No, I'm guilty of coming here at 5:30 so I could listen to their conversation. We talked through the purchasing policies.
Oh,
The
okay.
recommendation would be that of you and Carla making those limits for those three.
I think that could work as far as, from my perspective, it could work.
Certainly, after listening to Heather's very comprehensive reporting, all of the various departments, I mean, there wasn't a one purchase that was even in the ballpark of 75. I mean, pretty soon coffee's gonna call you. One question, I know in other locations in the charter, it does indicate, let's say, commissioner, that you have to have a supermajority vote from the commission, as in 4 out of 5. And I'm thinking that for budget purposes, for budget items like this, we would want to have that.
Yeah, I think somewhere there's a list, one of which are all ordinances, or 4/5 vote. I don't know where that list, is that in the charter? I don't know where, I just.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, yeah, all ordinance, if it's adopted by ordinance, that would come with that requirement.
I'm gonna have to look up what she's doing.
Yeah, it sits in the back of your head, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, 7.4, actions required supermajority. The city commission may enact, amend, or repeal of ordinance by the affirmative vote of not less than 4 city commissioners. In order to get this, that's covered.
I don't know, and if we didn't get it to you today, it was just ironic that my city manager listserv, somebody asked about purchasing limits. Did you give it to them?
Yeah,
That's sort of.
you weren't included
All over
that,
the map.
really, from 7,500 to 50,000.
Yeah, it's a wide range. I laughed if somebody had $300 on there. Does that show up on your,
Yeah,
like everything over $300 had to go? So, yeah, I think it just.
Yeah, that's what I was saying to them earlier, is Muskegon has $500 in their charter.
Yeah.
Grand Rapids has, it starts at 10,000 upwards, all the way to $500,000 of emergency purchase authority. And it's, I think it does speak to great need for flexibility.
it was this woman, I don't know where she's from, Sarah Moyer Kale. The department heads can't spend more than 300, my limit is 5,000. Anything over 5,000 requires sealed bids and council approval, and then she says we are presently working on changing this.
I'm sure everybody is
Everyone's
running into
right.
this issue at this time because the
Yeah.
potential volatility of pricing.
Okay,
So I want to get some clarity, I guess, under the new language that you've developed, Stacy, there's this addresses, right, the need for commission approval, or the need to do that based on dollar figure. But it doesn't address RFP in particular. Is your vision that the treasurer and city manager are also going to set that, whatever that cap is as a part of this?
Yeah, I think they should be determining processes, which may vary depending on specific uses, dollar amounts, because there's gonna be enough difference from one thing to another thing. It's not like, you can't just lump all purchases together and expect them to be equal. You know, buying copy paper is not the same as buying a police car, or replacing air conditioning units for a building. They're completely different worlds. And so between the ordinance and the purchasing process, those things should be able to be handled as they need to. And it might be a really long purchasing process once all is said and done, but it should be able to cover the things that they need to.
You're talking about like when you have to get quotes and that when you have to do a PO.
So in other words, yeah, like some cities have, like we have a cap, right, 7,500 happens to be both the cap for commission approval, but also to obtain quote, or
To do bidding, public bidding.
So what I'm asking is a part of this process, are the treasurer and city manager also making that determination, right? That would inform the ordinance about what the RFP is.
I think, looking at one of the minutes from 2016, it had said something about the streetlights are only available from one vendor. And at that point, that's never going to go out for bid unless the city determines we need to replace
Placing
or
them all.
revamp everything. So if that never has to go out for bid, that would be an exclusion under the purchasing process, most likely, saying, you know, it goes out for bid unless it's one of these items.
That
If-
would be in the ordinances, not in the charter.
It would either be in the ordinance or the purchasing process,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
makes the most sense. But I feel like that needs to be something that's dictated. How do you send something out if it's over $7,500, or even if we chose, you know, $500,000? There's still only one company that can do it. You're not getting competitive bids at that point. So what we have right now will never actually work. And this gives the opportunity to handle those scenarios.
I mean, you can make sole source exclusions, right? So there are other mechanisms that we can put in there that work around that. That could even be something that rather than have to establish the ifs and wherefores for streetlights, but not drain systems and police cars with fire trucks or whatever. Just in the instance where there's a sole source vendor, it's not necessary to go through that process. My concern is also the ream of paper that ordinance would potentially need to be printed on, right? And having it be clear to everybody, I think is also important too, and I'm a little bit concerned about different caps for one department versus another, although I do agree that it's probably the most appropriate from a flexibility perspective. Having worked at a big organization where it's really good for everybody to just be able to go, okay, 10,000 or 25 or whatever is the limit. I'm also a little bit worried about, right, the logistics or the administrative task of everybody going back and finding out what their limit for this specific type of item or in this specific type of situation is.
And there's nothing saying that the process or the ordinance couldn't say, you know, Public Works, Public Safety have this as their threshold, and then, you know, the clerk's office has this as their threshold, and have 2 or 3 depending on what it is. There's putting one limit for one person isn't gonna work for someone else, or it's gonna be excessive. So this it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be, you know, anything emergency services related is gonna be this. Anything that's, you know, something else would be this limit. And then there's a couple of different points, but it's gonna be whatever works for the city.
That's what I saw, I can't remember if it was Muskegon or Grand Rapids, had a provision in there of certain types of instances where an RFP, for example, could be waived. If it was for services supporting like safety and a couple of other, public health, safety and something else, those were like unquestioned, you could just act. That might be the kind of provision that we could look at.
But the department heads, the treasurer, the city manager can work together to figure out what will work for us. And as long as that's reasonable, the commission should approve it and then move forward. And hopefully life's easier for everyone.
Mark, how much of the spending do you approve? Does most of it go through you?
No,
No,
no, most of it goes for these folks.
through the department
Yeah.
and stays there?
The big purchases, I mean, I would be involved in almost all of those, one way, shape, or form. But the day-to-day purchasing, I don't do that. Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's important, to your point, to have, you know, it's a version, I think, of what Ann's talking about, is a version of 34.242526. If and when the cap is raised, you would adjust all these. I'm assuming that, you know, staff, if this is the direction we head, is some sort of overarching statement in the charter like you've drafted, and then, you know, we would draft an ordinance that addresses these levels that the commission then would adopt or consider and adopt and change, whatever, and then we would live by them. That's the way that's what I'm imagining happening based on that. And then, yeah, and then Danny or any of the rest would know that, you know, if then, so on, what she has to do, given a certain price amount, just like it is now, all this would get adjusted upward. Is that kind of the vision? Yeah. That makes sense, I think. Right?
Treasurer, does that sound workable?
Definitely.
You know. Saved us, Stace.
Is there anything else that you folks want to add? Any concerns or comments?
Anything else in the charter that holds you back?
No, I don't know. Nothing jumps to mind for me.
Okay, I think we have a plan.
I think we
Woo-hoo.
plan it to work.
Well, how about, we don't need to take any more of your time this evening, so thank you so very much for spending time with us and giving us your input. We can kind of hash out the language, maybe some of these little details that Ann is bringing up and so forth, and then run it by you folks for
Good.
another look-see. But I'm excited. You know, we want the government to be efficient, flexible, responsible, all that good stuff. And this is good outside the box thinking, Stacy. Thank you so much.
You guys are doing a good job in my city, too.
Thanks. Steve's new fire truck just came in to bid, since we're $769,000.
Cheap one.
That all, this isn't the hook and
Oh, when he
ladder.
bought that aerial truck.
That's a cheap.
It's under $1 million. I like the sound of it.
You know, that aerial truck was a hell of a one.
It'll be a little more.
Bill, you know what he bought it for?
Oh, man.
Thanks, you guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Have a great night. Be careful out there. Thank you. Well, I'm learning a lot.
Good night.
Thanks, Heather. proceed from here? Do you want to try smithing this tonight or leave it till the bigger group, the rest of the group is here?
I'd like the rest of the group to have an opportunity to weigh in on where we've landed, just given that.
This is
Then-
a big change from what we were
Yeah.
considering before. Ultimately, the more I think about it, the more I think this is the right direction to go in.
We're stuck on the
But
money part.
is it, again, I mean, the initial request I think was for 25,000 and we bumped it down to 12.5 because we weren't comfortable going up. And so if we don't have that comfort level, even with a fairly minimal on the scale of a city budget, change, going and saying, we are gonna put our trust in the city and the commission to make the right call, to keep things running smoothly, that's a huge leap based on how most of our conversations have gone. And I think the city staff that were here today appreciate the ability to make these changes and customize it to fit their needs. But if that's not something we as a group are okay with, and also if we don't think that the voters would go for such a drastic change.
That's really what I'm kind of hung up on. I have a little bit of, and it's not like, oh, it can't work. I think, needs tweaking. I can see a situation, like, let's look at what some local, bodies have had recent elections where there's a very strong ideological direction, right, reflected in the people. And those people aren't always working as nicely or in as much tandem with the people that they administrate. I can see a situation here where you could have a commission that is not prepared to approve any amount, right? Because they're almost acting in direct conflict with what they see as a bureaucracy that's too expensive, whatever the cause of the day is, right? So I wonder if it wouldn't behoove us to either have recommend, in addition to the treasurer and city manager, a designee from the commission to be a part of the forming of that recommendation, so that there's more flow between the city staff and the elected body and more representation for the elected body in the process of establishing that recommendation, so that it's potentially likelier to pass and more of it's a little bit more participatory for the commission. I also wonder if it wouldn't be wise to at least, right now it says the commission approves or denies, creating ordinance if approved. We need to kind of get at what happens if they can't come to terms, right? I think that's probably part of because I can see, a lot of hemming and hawing and back and forth between these two groups if there is, a disconnect between them. How long can they go before they approve or just have to revert to whatever the previous year was, so that it's not in question, so that city can still function?
If they disapproved, it would automatically go back to what was there, and the ordinance right now says 7,500, and if they disapproved any raise, it would be at 7,500. And then they could put another recommendation in the next week to change the ordinance and work it.
Well, and I'm still at clarity. You kind of said this is something that happens sort of as needed, but then it also kind of got tied to the annual budgeting process and the conversation you were having with Mark. So I kind of want to understand exactly what the timing we expect to have here There is.
So I do want to interject. I wrote this in like 2 minutes
No,
after our
I'm-
last meeting,
yeah.
so this is in no way, shape, or form like
And I'm not trying
fully
to,
thought out. So
yeah.
like wordsmithing this, I don't think is necessarily a good idea. This was just like the general idea, and we're just I don't want to be like fully running with it.
I
Like
didn't mean to be wordsmithing so much
Yeah.
as concepts.
it's easier to just wordsmith something that we can see. So I get it, but like my interpretation, whether it's on an annual basis, it's as needed, doesn't really matter, and that's definitely something we could work.
I think, yeah, I think we need to talk about that further. And what I'd like to do is kind of almost like model UN, like run a couple of like mini test cases, right? And maybe that's something we could do, or something we could subcommittee or something like that. But I kind of want to browser beat it and make sure that there isn't, because it is so different, a way that it potentially fails people in the future. I love it from the standpoint that it means they can go get the stuff that they need today, and fewer people have to boil their water and all the other stuff we talked about last time. But I'm just sensitive to the fact that we want to also not consider something and create an even bigger mess, like, you know, some kind of loophole that we didn't foresee in this too. It's a very good idea. I'm glad you presented it.
Karen, were you at the commission meeting yesterday?
It was.
What was the direction that the commissioners were going in for their initial thoughts on proposing changing to something like this for us?
It was at the very end of the meeting, and it was just kind of chatter, and they threw out basically the same type of a thing. They can change an ordinance as needed, as opposed to waiting for 10 more years. Now, that's not to say that it's gonna happen every single meeting either. And they are drafted by our attorney, and there's a whole process that goes through. It would give the flexibility to buy things in an emergency. They didn't get that specific on it, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's,
But it is, obviously a lot easier. You can change an ordinance in a meeting as opposed to even making an amendment to the charter takes
right.
whatever long. I would like to still see at least 4 commissioners, but how about this? What you just shared with us about when you wrote this. I think, what I'd like, it would help me, if, first of all, you want to take this back and look at it and see how you want to present it
I mean, I think
to the group?
this is kind of a starting point. I think it's close-ish. It's not specific. Because I didn't want to, I could go either way on the annual or as needed. And with a lot of things, because it's, well, in this case, this would be best, in this case, that would be best. So I prefer to have it just like open-ended, and that's up for discussion.
And anytime they want to change it,
about having it?
I couldn't go with that.
Well, I mean, they would have to, again, to get an ordinance, it goes through the lawyer first. Like, it's not just something that you throw on every meeting and make a change. But my thought for as needed was, they might have to do it twice in the first year because they messed something up. And then, 3-4 years down the road, they're planning ahead, the economy's pretty stable, things are looking good, and, then they might not have to revisit it for 4 or 5 years.
Another thing too, I'm sorry to interrupt you, that happens as well. A lot of these ordinances, we will sit down, we're actually gonna be discussing one on February 3rd. They are already existing, but they're making changes to them, proposed changes, and it's gonna be a work session. So the attorney has made the changes, it's, now everybody's gonna sit down and really discuss it before we go to the next step. So it's not anything that's done hastily either. There is a whole process, so, which is what they would do with this too, I'm sure.
Let me suggest this, if I may. Make note of any and all questions or concerns that you have about what we're thinking to do. And if we would do this, write them down, send them to Karen, she could collate them, so that we have that document to look at our next meeting. We're not in a big rush. There's no deadline for when we have to.
Yeah, I'd love to walk this forward and see what we get, where we get with its sort of final form before we really like commit. Yes.
But,
This could also be included in our survey at some point and be like, okay, right now we have
You approve.
restrictions because of, it's difficult for anything time sensitive and the dollar amount is a little bit unreasonable for things purchased on a city scale. So we're proposing this. What are your concerns with it, if any?
this is a kind of issue you can't just dump on the public and ask them to give you an opinion. There has to be some education around this, so either focus groups or some other way to do that.
Or maybe we ask it a different way, like we did some of the other stuff in the survey,
Yeah,
so that it's.
I guarantee you, the
bite-sized.
public doesn't have the first clue how purchasing happens. I certainly didn't until I got onto the commission, I would be honest about that. But we have some time, we were not, bucking up against a deadline as far as, making a decision about this. And, it's, we're in that, what makes sense for like 2026, what we get this voted on, and what's gonna make sense in 27, 8, 9, and so on and so forth. And I like the idea of this. I like that it gives them more flexibility, and I think there's more, it can allow them to be more nimble. Apropos what Ann is referring back to, and this is true, I'm thinking about our budget system and the fact that every year the budget has to go through an audit, or the treasurer's office goes through an audit, and they always they ask the city commissioners to fill out a questionnaire, and those questions have to do with, are you aware of any place where fraud might be getting committed, or fraud could be getting committed, or any of this kinds of thing. And what we have here, and I think we're very fortunate in this regard, we have a lot of safeguards in our system, not the least of which is the reporting, the quarterly reporting, the collaboration between city treasurer, city manager, and so on and so forth. We can't necessarily, much as we might like, plan for all contingencies of bad actors in the future. I mean, it's sad commentary that we're hoping we never have bad actors, but one never knows. So we do want to be mindful about making sure that that system has integrity to the extent that we can stipulate it in the charter. That we kind of have to do a leap of faith with the electeds to make sure. And quite frankly, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's our job to call them out. Okay, great discussion. Thank you so much. Write your questions down, shoot them to Karen. And
Date for us to hit.
I can,
Save it on the thumb drive so Karen can send it out.
I was gonna say, I can actually send that to you guys tonight if you want, so you have a chance to.
You don't have to do it tonight.
Well, I'm gonna be gone the rest of the week, and then, what?
You just took the job and you're already taking vacation.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
Awesome, and talk
now our money's being spent now, okay.
just really quickly, and I wanted to broach this with you, for February 12th, we're gonna try and get those last 4 chapters done, although they're pretty short. Something that came to my attention was, should we be thinking about a policy of some kind or some entry in the charter having to do with the use of AI in government? And I went on the MML website and I found there was, at the last conference, someone did a PowerPoint presentation about this very topic, and they created a handbook to go with it, which I would like to just send out to you folks. Kind of goes through the pros and cons of AI and how municipalities are using it currently. But given that we're in the age of AI technology now, and it's gonna get even more pronounced, And as a matter of fact, I just saw that the newly inaugurated president is just letting people know about a $500 million investment in AI infrastructure.
Saw that.
So if it's okay with you, I'm going to send out a handbook, have you just read through it and think about how we might, if we should be incorporating that in the charter, how we might do that. There's some language that we might be able to borrow, but just your thoughts on that. Also, next meeting, I believe our budget needs to be submitted in March. So we need to talk about the budget amendment, and hopefully, Mr. Fowler asked our consultant to change out a paragraph in the contract that he proposed having to do with changing arbitration to mediation. So I'm waiting to hear back from Mr. Letzman, but the one thing I wanted to bring up with you with regard to the budget. I contacted a gentleman over at Big Rapids BDX. I was gonna go do my little radio blurb about the charter and the survey. And he suggested that we do an ad buy. And I told him, well, at this juncture, we don't really have the budget for an ad buy, but if we want to think about adding that to our budget for 25-6, there are different things you can do with like a certain number of 30-second spots over a period of 4 months. I will bring that information for you, see if you think it's worth including some money for an ad buy in our budget for the next time, not for this time. Whether you think that return on our investment would be worthwhile.
Which one would you be thinking of?
Which station? Well, that depends on how much money we want to spend. We can do like all 4 stations that they have, or we could focus it on YBR or whichever one.
Yeah, there's certain demographics for
There's
each
certain
one.
demographics for each one, exactly so. So I'm doing my blurb next Tuesday. Just wanting to give people a little bit of the intro about the charter and direct them to the survey. And then I'm going to get that information from them so that I can share that with you at our next meeting. Anything else for the good of the order? Thanks very much, everybody. Meeting is adjourned. And bundle up. Be careful now.
Stand that, no, I'll get there before her meeting was done. She got one
Outside for 15 minutes today.
That's where
You had 2 kids home for snow days?
Laura goes.
Well, 3. The one's a teenager, so he's not too much trouble anymore. But the 6 and 7-year-old, oh my gosh.
Oh, my goodness.
Gotta entertain them all day.
How
much snow down in Tampa?
Today, right?
The
They
ultimate
didn't get anything in Tampa, but up in northern Florida, I have friends that live in Milton, they got like 3 inches.
They're just,
Well, I think they were all like, that's what the university did.
Live here.
They opened it
And he grew up
today,
friend of my wife.
because I think that's when temperatures were started to come up
They were
above whatever
expecting it
is
to
sort
be
of.
about
got 3 inches today.
12 by noon.
Well, I loved it.
Another 10 years, snowbirds will be coming up here in the winter.
Yep, yeah, we'll have the
Yesterday was
nice